Hi, everybody. Greetings from a very wet, cold, windy Cape Town again tonight. I was hoping that we'd film this episode of the Jameson raid outdoors, and in fact, I found a very nice setting. But if I have to wait for the weather to improve, we're going to be waiting forever. So, if it's okay with you, we'll continue, shall we say, here in the studio. The first part of this story certainly generated a lot of comments on this channel. And I just want to say that I welcome them all. This incident is fraught with contradiction and confusion and controversy. And it's only natural that there's more than one side to this account. So, folks, it's all part of the narrative. And people just don't need to listen to what I have to say about it. They need to read your comments as well and understand your feelings. So I don't mind, just bear in mind, it's my job to try and recreate the sentiments of the time. So I try and do that. And I would like to actually respond to some of the things that folk have said, but certainly not in this episode. We don't have time for that. Maybe when we get to the last part, if you'll allow me to, I'd just like to come back on a couple of things. But, it's a long ride from the Bechuanaland border to Johannesburg, and I don't think we're going to cover that all tonight. But if we can ride with Jameson up to, say, Otto's Hoop, and then we'll take a look and see how we are for time and take it from there. So let's not waste any more of it. Shall we go straight to Pitsani? In 1895, if you wanted to travel from the tip of Africa to Rhodesia, you would go down to the Cape Town railway station, buy yourself a ticket on a steam train, and that would take you as far as Mafeking. There the line ended. And upon arrival there, you would have 2 hours to buy yourself a ticket for the Rhodesian coach. Now, these coaches were imported from America, beautifully handcrafted, strong, rugged, light and fast. And the ticket would cost you £45. It's quite a lot of money in those days. And woe betide you if you brought too much luggage with you, because the priority of the Rhodesian coach, other than carrying passengers, was to carry the mail. So once the mail bags were loaded, if there was space for your luggage, by all means you were welcome. But if you brought too much, you'd either pay a premium or you'd have to get rid of it and abandon it. And you'd be sharing this coach with 11 other passengers, 12 of you in total. Coach would be drawn by 10 mules, and you could expect that if they were in good health and the roads were in good condition, you could get to Bulawayo in about 6 days. That's traveling day and night. But it was better to budget 10 days. That was more likely the length of the journey, and sometimes it was even a bit more. Now, don't think you'd be in for a luxury time, eh? By all accounts that I've read, and I don't mean this irreverently, you'd be in for a hell of a ride. And so, with all the arrangements done, the driver would cup his hands to his mouth and holler, "All aboard!" And of course, the mules would prick their ears up. People in their homes would come out, and come out from the shops as well, and line the street to come and watch this spectacle of the coach leaving the town. And once everybody had scrambled inside, settled down, the driver's assistant would take a horn and give several long blasts. The driver would crack his whip, and he would call out to the mules, "Aisha, Aisha, Aisha!" And with a thundering of hooves, the coach would gallop through the town. Yeah, that's the way the stagecoach left. I mean, that gives the impression of an express service, doesn't it? It wouldn't do for them just to pick up their hooves and, sort of like a leisurely little step out of town. It didn't work like that. And so there the inhabitants would be standing on the side of the road, waving, and the coach would depart. And only once the last house was out of sight would the mules be brought down to a more leisurely trot. And they would maintain this hour after hour after hour. Now, every so often there'd be a staging post, and you'd stop there, and the mules would be exchanged. Fresh mules would be hitched up, and the journey would continue from there. So about an hour or an hour and a half would be allowed for that, and it gives you the opportunity to stretch your legs, maybe buy some food if there was anything available. As you got further from Mafeking, this became more of a problem. So you had to make sure that you carried something in the coach for yourself for those particular staging posts that would not supply you with anything to eat. They didn't have anything. Now, Pitsani was one of these staging posts, and there was very little there. One store and a corral for the mules, and a man that managed it. So if you got off the coach there, and you happen to hear rifle fire in the distance, you might say to yourself, well, that sounds like a big hunting party. And if later on you heard the sound of a bugle, you'd think, wow, this is all very curious. And if you asked the man in charge there, hey, what's happening here? He'd say, oh, don't worry about it, sir. That's from Mallet Farm. That's nearby here. It's a BSAP training camp. A BSAP camp? Yes. Out here, yeah. What are they doing there? He said, well, haven't you heard? Mr. Rhodes is building a railway line from Mafeking to Bulawayo, and it's going to replace the stage line. Oh, are there lots of troopers there? Oh, there's hundreds, sir. Hundreds? Yeah, they're going to be protecting the workers. You know, it needs a big force. Now, if you had a bit of a business bent to your mind, you would be saying to yourself, there's not much here. Just flies and a few mules and a single store. And this guy tells me there's hundreds of people not far away from here. I think when I get to Bulawayo, I'm going to cable my cousin in Kimberley and tell him, man, there's an opportunity here. Sell up, get a wagon, load it up, especially with beers, and move yourself up to Pitsani, man. You can make money here. And this is precisely what happened. So, whereas at one time, Pitsani was just a staging post with very little there, gradually it kind of, grew and developed. First one store, then another, then another. Now, the man in charge of the force at Mallet Farm, Lieutenant Colonel John Willoughby, was not just a military man, he was also a businessman. He was the managing director of a company in Bulawayo at that time. And he must have looked upon this development at Pitsani there with a certain amount of misgiving. I mean, it's not very nice to see folk who have come here and, starting a business venture and destined to actually lose the shirt off their backs. Because these boys weren't going to stay here. If everything went to plan, they would be out of here soon. There was no permanent garrison intended for here. So they were destined to lose their businesses. So that couldn't have been a very nice thought. But the military side of him, that was a different thing altogether. I mean, nobody asked these people to come here and to take these risks. In fact, they were the ones who were posing the risk to this whole operation that had been planned so carefully by Rhodes, Byte, Willoughby, and Dr. Jameson. So this just sort of added a little bit of extra tension, having these businesses growing up, as it were, around them. The whole thing was that they were dependent upon secrecy to have any chance of their mission succeeding. You see, back in Johannesburg, in the Transvaal Republic, things were not well. They hadn't been for a long time. And Jameson himself had been there and gone to visit the city. He didn't spend a lot of time with the gold barons there of the Reform Committee. He did, he had talks with them. But he was more concerned about what did the guy in the street have to say and think about the situation there. Well, it wasn't particularly good. I mean, I have elaborated on these things on the previous episode, so I'm not going to go back over it again. But people were very unhappy and people were fearful and people were uncertain, and it was just a whole total unstable mess over there, that actually was going to boil over at some point. In fact, Uncle Paul's burgers approached him, and they said, "Sir, you better do something about this. This situation is going to get out of control. There's going to be a bad scene here still in Joburg." And he said, "Guys, just be patient. You got to have patience if you want to kill a tortoise. Just watch him. He'll stick his head out eventually, and then you cut it off and he's dead. They'll do the same. Wait until they make their move, and then we'll deal with them." So they knew that there was trouble coming. Now, Jameson had in his pocket a letter. It's quite a famous letter. It's known as the Women and Children letter. And this was penned by the Reform Committee. And I won't go into the whole detail, but basically what they were saying is, look, please come to our aid and help us. And it spoke about the women and children and the plight that they were in. So he had this. Now, I've said this before. We have to bear in mind that times there were very different to the times that we live in now. You can't motivate people today by talking about women and children. I don't think so. I mean, we have that in this country here. It seems like every few months there would be some big campaign about gender rights and women and children, and it's just a lot of talk, and nothing really changes. I think it's the same in other countries as well. So yeah, women and children are part of society. No one's denying that. But as for having any special rights, certainly not here where I live. I mean, I can stop at a traffic light and I can see children. We call them street kids or strollertjies. They're supposed to be in school. That's the law of the land. They're not in school. They're begging at the traffic lights. And nobody really bothers with them, because they are, in the greater scheme of things, in each of our lives, of no consequence. And that's a very blunt way of saying it. So I think that is where mankind has descended to, where women and children, they don't hold the place that they used to, as far as our protection goes. But it was different then. It was completely different. I mean, even Rhodes himself, after Lobengula died, went to great trouble to have Lobengula's kids brought down here to the Cape, and he raised them himself, put them in school. I mean, it was important for him. So don't think that this appeal by the citizens of Johannesburg held no sway with Jameson. It did. And in fact, if we just bear that in mind and we just take it at face value, look, this is what motivated this man to do this thing, then everything else falls into place. Once we start thinking, oh, this was a plan to capture the gold mines and, to do this and to do that and get rid of the Boers, and we start running into difficulties. But if we just take the simplicity of it, Jameson was worried about these people whom he regarded as fellow countrymen almost, mostly of British descent. Just wanted to help them. I think we would do well just to view it in that light. However, that's up to you. Having said that now, the difficulty in implementing this whole plan of rescuing these folk depended very much upon the mood in Johannesburg. And the mood there was that there was going to be an uprising. Not just a spontaneous thing, it was going to be organized. And a date had even been set for it. And that was the 28th of December, 1895. On that day, certain selected citizens of Joburg who had military training would be dispatched to Pretoria to lay hold of the arsenal there. And that was not very well guarded at that time. And they figured they could take control of that and at least eliminate any threat from the Staatsartillerie. That's the state artillery. So they could minimize that particular threat by taking control of the arsenal. So that was part of the plan. It was also intended that by that time Jameson would be on his way there. And hopefully this distraction caused by this uprising would enable him to just, as it were, suddenly appear in the streets of Joburg as though he's come from nowhere. And the original intention was that he would have 1,000 men with him, and that another 1,000 would be kept in reserve in Rhodesia under Colonel Speckley, and they could be called upon to come on down. Now, the intention wasn't to have a big punch-up with the Boers. The intention was to do that, to take control of Johannesburg, and then summon Sir Hercules Robinson up from the Cape, who was the High Commissioner, and use his good offices to negotiate with Paul Kruger some kind of a settlement whereby the Uitlanders, that is the foreigners that lived in Joburg, would be accorded certain rights that they certainly felt and that they were entitled to. Now, that was the broad plan. But the secret was to move that force from Pitsani to Johannesburg as quick as possible and as undetected as you could possibly hope for. Now, that's a tall order, but Dr. Henry Wolff, who was part of the Reform Committee, he came up with a plan, and he went and opened a company, the Rand Trading and Produce Syndicate, he called it, grand name, and he started building stores along the route that Jameson was proposed to take. That is from the frontier all the way to Joburg. Now, when I say stores, I don't mean these are stores that you could walk into and buy stuff. These were warehouses, if you like, wooden framed, clad in corrugated iron, and quite large. Each one would hold enough food, originally intended for 1,000 men, plus fodder for their horses. So they weren't shacks, they were quite sizable. And he had corrals constructed next to them. He had staff appointed, and he bought horses. And he started bringing these horses to these stores. Now, people looked at this and they thought, oh, what is he up to? Now, we mustn't imagine that every single Boer was a man with a beard who rode a horse and, looked around and kept his farm going. Some of them were businessmen in Johannesburg, very astute too. And they were colleagues of Henry Wolff, business associates, if you like. And some of them would approach him and say, Henry, man, what are you doing? Why? What are you building all these things for? Well, I'm starting a stagecoach line. Stagecoach line? Yeah. I'm going to be running a stagecoach from Bechuanaland to Joburg and back again. And these are my staging posts. I've got my horses there and my mules and everything. So I just need a little bit more time and then I'm going to put it in operation. Nee man. That can't be true. You're not going to make money that way. What's the real reason? Well, of course, Henry Wolff is going to tell nobody the real reason. But he would speak to these people confidentially. Can you keep this under your hat? Yeah, of course. Look, man, I've noticed when prices are high here in Johannesburg, they're low in Bechuanaland. When they are high in Bechuanaland, they're low in Joburg. So what do you think? What do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to buy here when prices are low, move it as quickly as I can over the border into Bechuanaland and make money. And I'm going to do vice versa. But the thing is, I've got to move the goods quick. Do you understand? "Ah, yeah, that can work. But don't tell anybody. No, 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 no. Your secret is safe with us. Don't worry, Henry. Thank you." So now he had a story for everybody that came to him. And he seemed to have everybody in his confidence. And, and nobody knew what the real story was. Not even his staff knew what they were supposed to be doing there. As far as they were concerned, they were waiting for the first stagecoach to come so that they could start, doing their work. Now, these staging posts were about 7 hours horse ride apart. So this was all set up very nicely. Jameson never got the 1,000 men. He never got a force that was quite that big. But it didn't seem to bother him and Willoughby too much, because they had enough men over there, they thought, to do the job. And if they still had to hang around and wait for 1,000 men to come down from Rhodesia and still train them, that it started extending the time before they would be ready for this operation. So they were quite content with the number of men they had, although they had an agreement with the British government to take over the surplus men of the Bechuanaland Border Police. They were down in Mafeking. So already a number of them, over 100, had agreed to join the British South Africa Company with their officers, or with most of their officers. Now, I've just got to tell you that these men all knew each other. I mean, they'd fought together in the Matabele War. They were well acquainted with each other. They were actually a good team. All the key players in this raid. I say the word raid. I mean, lately I've come across, as I've been sort of reading up on this, that people are beginning to say, hey, let's be careful with this word raid. It wasn't a raid. It was a rescue operation. So I should be saying to you, the Jameson rescue, but because we're so used to hearing about the Jameson raid, if you'll forgive me, I'll just keep referring to it in those terms. So all these raiders, the key men, were all known to each other, and they got on well together, and more to the point, they trusted each other, and that's what made them so strong. And I don't know if I should say this, but toward the end of the Rhodesian Bush War, I just wish that our High Command had that same kind of respect for each other. And perhaps I'm saying too much here, but I think we would have done better to have emulated the example of those early officers that served our country. At any rate, all the arrangements have now been made, and the 28th of December is the big day when this uprising is due to take place. Now we get to Christmas Day, the 25th, and the Reform Committee sit and they have a meeting. And there's issues, they can't resolve them. And you would think this is quite petty, but the biggest issue is the flag. They're thinking now, what are we going to do after this rebellion, if you like, is over? After Sir Hercules Robinson comes here and he's now settled everything and the Boers have agreed to certain terms, what flag are we going to fly? And can you believe that they came to loggerheads over this? So much so that they had to adjourn the meeting. And they said, look, the whole thing is off. The rebellion, the raid, everything. First week, second week of January next year, Rhodes better come up here from the Cape, sit in on these meetings, and we'll come to some sort of conclusion. But right now, all bets are off. Nothing's going on. So they send Jameson a telegram to that effect. Don't come in here now. Everything is cancelled. Well, he wasn't very happy to hear that. And he replied, listen, you can't stop me now. What's going on down there? Well, he didn't say that, but I mean words to this effect. You can't stop me now. I've already sent out patrols to cut the telegraph wires. What do you think the Boers are going to think when the whole telegraph system suddenly goes down and nothing else happens? They're going to be thinking, hey, there's something fishy going on here. And I don't need the Boers to have their suspicions aroused. You can't do this to me, guys. Sort your lives out over there. Let's get going with this thing. And so the telegrams go backwards and forwards between the committee and individuals of the committee and the folk at Pitsani. And Jameson is really, I mean, his men are ready. Everything is fine. It's just now this delay is just adding to the risk of the Boers finding out. You can't have that. I mean, as it is, the stakes are so high. It is such a long way to go to ride to Johannesburg. 170 miles, and he's got all these men and their equipment. How is he possibly going to do it undetected? He knows that the chances are so slim. One of the officers even, they knew when they get to Joburg, they're not going to just be there for a couple of days. So they had to take some of their personal possessions with, so that, they could, just at least take care of themselves for a few weeks or a few months while they were there in Johannesburg. One of the officers was busy packing his trunk, and somebody said to him, "Hey, you got the code books over there. This is sensitive information. You can't carry this in your trunk with you." And he said, "Listen, it doesn't make any difference. Don't worry about it." I said, "But if the Boers find us," said, "Look, I can tell you now, if the Boers find us, if the Boers capture us, we're going to be put against the wall and shot. Whether there are code books in my possession or not is going to make no difference. The fact that I'm partaking in this raid is enough for my death sentence." So they knew it was all or nothing. Well, it didn't help the Reform Committee. He mustn't come. They're not ready for him. What's he going to do there? It's going to be a disaster. And they told him too, in as many words, anticipate total failure if you come. Don't come. So Jameson sends a telegram to Rhodes, and he says, "Listen, I can't hold back any longer. I've got to get on with my work. If I don't hear from you, to the contrary, I am leaving tonight." So a little bit later, he sends another telegram. Now, it's a pity that he coached the telegram in those words, because there was no response from Rhodes. There was nothing to the contrary, and the reason being is that the Telegraph office back in Cape Town was shut down. I mean, it's like New Year's Eve, eh? So Rhodes never gets the telegrams, so he doesn't respond. And by the time he gets them, it's too late. So Sunday afternoon, Captain Holden comes galloping into the camp at Pitsani. He's come from Johannesburg from the Reform Committee. He's travelled 170 miles in something like 72 hours on one horse. And he jumps off and he says, "Dr. Jameson, I've got a message for you. The Reform Committee say, don't move, don't come." So Dr. Jameson says, "Okay, thank you." And not long afterwards, another man arrives, Morris Heaney, also sent by the Reform Committee. But he's come by train, you see. He's gone as far as Mafeking, and he's jumped off there, got on the stagecoach, got to Pitsani, climbed off the stagecoach and walked over to Mallet Farm. So he goes up to Dr. Jameson and he says, "I got a message for you from the Reform Committee. Don't come here. We don't need you. If you do come, there's going to be trouble. Everybody's safe. Don't move." So, oh dear. Then another message comes, but this time not from the Reform Committee. It comes from Reuters, the news agency, and it comes via Telegraph. And it says that women and children are leaving Johannesburg in a panic, that there's unrest there. Well, this report wasn't true, but Jameson wasn't to know this. And then yet another report comes, supposedly from a reliable source. And this said that a commander was gathering at Zeerust, which was just over the border. Well, not just over the border, but over the border. Was gathering at Zeerust with orders to march on Johannesburg to quell an uprising. Now, what could he do? And Willoughby reminded him, "Sir, we were told by that committee that if anything untoward occurs, anything that we hadn't anticipated, we mustn't wait for instructions. We must march on Johannesburg immediately." And Jameson says, "Yeah, I know. I'm well aware of that." And now he's stuck with a problem. If he doesn't do anything, what is going on in Johannesburg over there? Reuters, reputable agency, say that people are streaming out of the town. There's panic and mayhem. This reliable source of ours has come here now to say that over at Zerust, the commando is gathering. Are they gathering at other points as well? Are there other towns where the Boer forces are marshalling themselves together, ready to march on to Johannesburg? The longer I wait here, the more difficult it becomes. If these people overtake me and they are there in Joburg before I am, I'm going to be outnumbered. Goodness knows how much to one. How will I ever cope? And so he walks up and down between the tents at Pitsani for 20 minutes with his chin on his chest, and he's thinking, and he's thinking. And eventually he walks over to Morosini. And Morris says to him, "What are you going to do?" He says, "I'm going in." He said, "I thought you'd say that." So Jameson says to him, "And Morris, what are you going to do?" "Well, I'm going with you." He says, "Well, I thought you'd say that too." So Morosini, who's now been sent by the Reform Committee to hold Jameson back, now joins him. And when Captain Holden sees this, he says, "Hey, I'm not going to be left behind." So he joins as well. So here you have these two men. And folk marvel at the lack of psychology on the part of the Reform Committee. They say it's like a prisoner's escaped, and you take his two cellmates and you say, "Quick, run after him, catch him and bring him back." Well, it ain't going to happen. They're all going to gap it. And this is what took place. So they join up with Jameson. 3:00 in the afternoon, the men are paraded. Dismounted parade, stand in a square around Jameson. And he addresses them. "Boys," he says, "I want to tell you why you're here." And he produces the women and children letter. He's going to read it out to them. Excuse me. Unfortunately, and it's a little bit hard to understand in some respects, he's altered the date. The letter was written in November. It's now December. Okay. So he's changed the date. I haven't seen, copies of this letter, but I would imagine that where it says 11 for November, he's made it a 12. And this really told against him when his trial took place in England. And it looked bad. But the thing is, none of the circumstances in Johannesburg had changed, even though the date may have been changed on the letter. Things were still as dire and as desperate and as serious in December as they had been in November. At any rate, enough of that. So he reads out this letter so that they know that they are going in by invitation. And then he says, there are a few things that I want you guys to bear in mind. He says, first of all, this is not an offensive force. We're not going there to attack anybody. We will not attack anybody unless we are first attacked. We will defend ourselves, yes, but we are not going in as an aggressive force. And secondly, he said, we are not going in there to molest anybody that lives in the Transvaal. There's to be no looting. There's to be no harassment of citizens. Nothing. You guys are to be on your best behavior. He said, and thirdly, we are only going there in order to support the citizens of Johannesburg in their rightful claims. So, please bear all this stuff in mind. And now he says, I want to ask you, would you like to volunteer for this? And to a man, they step forward, every one of them, and they volunteer. They're happy to go. And Jameson concludes by saying, listen, there are some men down in Mafeking that will be meeting up with us after we've crossed the border. They are from the Bechuanaland Border Police. They are excellent men, good men, and we're going to be riding hard, eh? We're going to be going for Joburg in 2 days if we can, 3 days maximum. So I don't want you blokes to let our side down, eh? We're going to be riding with the Bechuanaland Border Police. So you Rhodesians, you know, do your best to keep up, eh? I know I can count on you guys. You've got a couple of hours to check your kit, make sure everything's fine, check your saddlery, check your weapons, and we'll be moving out later on this afternoon. And with that, the men are dismissed. Now, with respect to their firearms, that is an interesting little subject on its own, which I don't propose to go into. But if you have the time, look onto YouTube and find this little video. It's excellent, and it gives you a nice bit of background into the type of weapons that they carried. Originally, as I said, the force was supposed to be 1,000 strong. It never ended up anywhere near that. And each of those 1,000 men was supposed to carry an extra rifle. So plenty of rifles were ordered, eh? But that was also abandoned in the end. The idea was that the extra rifle would be handed over to the Reform Committee once they got to Joburg. So at 6:30, the command rings out, "Stand to your horses!" And they do that. "Prepare to mount! Mount!" And they step out into the evening, across the frontier, into the Transvaal. To the south, at 8 o'clock that evening, the Bechuanaland Border Police force that is there are paraded. And there are about 100 men who have now agreed to go over to the British South Africa Company. But there are a number of others who haven't. They don't want to. So they are formed into what was called then, that night, F Troop. So Major Charlie Coventry marches F Troop away from the main body of men about 300 paces, and he halts them. And he does this in order that Lieutenant Colonel Raleigh Gray may speak to them. Now, all of these men that were involved in the raid, all the key men, were larger than life. I mean, it's very difficult in this day and age to look at the sort of people that are around us and say, you know, he reminds me of Dr. Jameson. He reminds me of Alan Wilson. You know, it's very hard to make those comparisons. These men were great men, and they were big men in their own right. And each of them deserves a biography. I mean, Jameson, I have said so much about him in so many of these episodes. John Willoughby, an exceptional man himself. Even Colonel Spreckley up in Rhodesia with his 1,000 men there. A good man. And then you had the White brothers, Harry and Bobby and Charles, lieutenant colonels, all good men, eh? Excellent men. Chief Inspector Bodle. Oh, one look at his face and you knew here's a man you never wanted to tangle with. Great individual, courageous as a lion. And so I could go on. But the man that I find the most fascinating of all, I have to say, is Charlie Coventry. He came out to South Africa as a cricketer, strangely enough. Played 2 test matches here in Cape Town. And then when the squad went back to England, he decided he would stay here, and he joined the Bechuanaland Border Police. Now, I've mentioned him before on a previous episode. He was the owner of one of those 2 famous horses, Brandy and Soda. Now, you may recall that I spoke about these horses and the important part that they played when Alan Wilson and his men were massacred on the banks of the Shangani River. And Forbes had to bring that force back to Bulawayo. and 2 men were sent off to take the news. And the best horses that were available and that were selected for the job were Brandy and Soda. And they carried Pete Ingram and Billy Lynch all the way through the Matabele lines. Thousands and thousands of hostile warriors, these horses picked their way through them and brought them safely to Bulawayo. Well, Charlie Coventry owned one of those horses. So, yeah, we've mentioned him in that context. But he was an incredibly interesting person. After the raid, he was wounded at Krugersdorp, and his leg was shattered. They threw a blanket over him. The rumor went around, Charlie's dead. Somebody looked under the blanket. They saw, no, this man is still alive. But they had nowhere to treat him. So they took him and stuck him in a shop window. And there they attended to his wounds. And then he was brought to England along with the others and put on trial. Now this trial, they had to sell tickets to try and control the crowds that were streaming into the courtroom. It's the only way they could do it. And people were packed into that room. And all of them, until they knew better, looking at the accused sitting there, concluded that Charlie Coventry was the leader. He just looked the part, sat there, bronzed from the African sun, open-faced, humorous, almost laughing at the proceedings, unconcerned. And then only afterwards people would be told, no, he's not the man in charge. The man in charge is the one on the other side of the bench. And there would be Dr. Jameson, totally dejected, broken in spirit, broken in body. He was in ill health at that time, and he would just sit there. You could just see the despair and the despondency on his features. And the others as well, likewise. Understandably so, I think. But not Charlie Coventry. He just looked at this lot. And I can just imagine what went through his mind. I have faced 100,000 Matabele spears from the Shangani River to Bulawayo. I have faced 6,000 Boer marksmen. I've had my leg shattered. I've been put on display in a shop window for the locals to gawk at while I was being treated. I'm one of the few people alive who has ever read his own obituary in a newspaper. I have gone through hell to try and rescue your countrymen in Johannesburg who are living under appalling conditions. And you people sit here, you bunch of whitewashed jam stealers, in judgment over me. Ha! I love this guy. Oh, I wish we had more like him around. Yeah, not these cupcakes that the human race seems to be spitting out these days. And I just need to say something more about Charlie, if I may. They were all brought to England, and still in their uniforms that they had on when they were captured. Bush hats, the works, eh? And they're taken, I think, to Bow Street Police Station and charged there. And now got to appear in court later on. Excuse me. £1,000 bail paid by the British South Africa Company for each one of them. So when they are released, a little bit later, so the story goes, Charlie buys a newspaper, and lo and behold, he reads there about his own death. But more alarmingly, that a memorial service is planned for that very day. So he rushes on home, okay? He arrives there, and the servant says, sorry, everybody's gone down to the church. So he moves himself over to the church, and the place is packed. He's too late, the service has started. But anyway, he goes in through the door and squeezes himself into a corner over there, and he watches the service. So guys stand up, one after the other. Well, I remember Charles Splendid fellow. I went to Eton with him, and we used to play inter-schools cricket. And, and so they would talk about all the good things that they remembered about him. So Charlie stands there and he's trying to stop laughing. He can't contain himself. And one after the other, these people stand up and they all extol his virtues and what a great and wonderful. And he thought to himself, I better bring this to a stop because this is getting too much now. And so he had to yell out in the church, "Whoa, wait, stop. Everything's okay, I'm here." And he pushed his way to the front. Well, you can imagine the stir that this must have created. I mean, forgive me. You're grieving and you believe the worst and you go to church and you're sitting there. And I mean, it's a very, very somber business and a funeral service. And yeah, the man that you've come to remember appears in front of you and he's perfectly all right. So, I believe more than one lady fainted. So, Charlie, he was a good guy. Anyway, he marches these men 300 paces away from the main body, and Lieutenant Colonel Raleigh Gray speaks to them. "Gentlemen, what is your reason for not wanting to transfer over to the British South Africa Company?" Now, there was one man amongst them there by the name of Sergeant White. Now, he explained, I understand what he's trying to say. He's trying to say, look, I'm a married man. I have to take into account my security of employment. I can't afford to chop and change and jump around and then join another force. I'm quite happy here where I am. And thank you very much. I will not be transferring. But this man was brought to London as well. Excuse me. And he appeared in court as well as a witness for the Crown. And they asked him there, "These gentlemen sitting over here, do you recognize any of them?" Yeah, well, of course he knew them. "So why did you not join them?" Now, Sergeant White did not explain himself as well in court as he did there on the parade square. And when a very unfortunate choice of words. When he said what he did, it sounded to the court as though he said, "I'm a married man, and it wouldn't do for me to be seen in the company of these people." So, anyway, we'll talk more about Sergeant White because he has a key part in the story. Anyway, they gathered a few more volunteers. The question was asked, if we go and join up with the BSAP and go into the Transvaal, because they knew that was the mission, will we be fighting for the Crown? And Raleigh Gray said to them, "You will be fighting for the glory of the Empire." And which was not exactly the right kind of answer to the question that was asked. Anyway, they leave there, and the last remaining senior officer, this is about 10 o'clock at night, as they move out of the HQ there, he says to them, "Goodbye. You are aware of the fact that I will have to report you, though, eh?" So the reply comes back, "Do what you like. The telephone lines have been cut." Now, this is the interesting part to this whole business with the raid, the question of the telegraph lines. When Jameson left Pitsani, the line 3 miles south of that settlement was cut. When Raleigh Gray left with the Bechuanaland Border Police to join Jameson, the line was again cut 3 miles south of Mafeking. Now, one of the objections that Jameson had when the Reform Committee said to him, "Don't come into Johannesburg yet, we can't, you're doomed to failure," is he said to them, I can't wait any longer because I've already sent out patrols to cut the wires. Now, there's a story, and I don't believe it for 1 minute, but it goes like this, that a patrol was sent out to cut the telegraph line between Rustenburg and Zurich. Now, that's deep into enemy territory. It's the kind of task that the SAS would do today. And you would send, your best men to do that sort of thing. But these men that were sent on that mission, so the story goes, got drunk instead. I mean, they're miles behind where they should be. They drink, and not only do they drink, they get so drunk that they can't remember what they're supposed to do. They remember in their groggy frame of mind that they're supposed to cut a wire. So they cut the fence wire of a Boer farmer. That is absolute nonsense, but I mean, the story was very popular. It did the rounds at the time of the raid, after the raid, and the Boers found it of great amusement that these Rhodesians were so stupid. And I'm sorry to say that even here and there you come across a historian today who will still allude to that and lament the fact that these people were so irresponsible. But it never happened. And I will give you my reasons why later. So at any rate, the next morning, 5:30, Jameson has travelled through the night with his men, and they arrive at a place called Otto'shoop. Not long afterwards, Raleigh Grey arrives with his men, and they meet up. A 2-hour halt is called for in order for them to sort themselves out and to take a break, and then they're going to move off again. So one of the first things they do when they arrive in Otto'shoop is they go to the Telegraph office, and they check there to see if there's any signals that have come through from Pretoria giving any indication that the Boers know about this raid. Well, there's nothing there. But to be safe, they go and wake up the telegraph operator, a gentleman by the name of Mr. Albertus Meyring, who's fast asleep. And the first thing he knows about armed troops being in the town is when an officer shakes him by the shoulder and says, "Please, would you get up? Do you know anything about any messages that may have come through from Pretoria?" Well, there's nothing has come through as far as he knows. So that's fine. So while these people are still busy reorganizing themselves, the two forces are now combined there, a gentleman steps out from amongst the houses there, and he walks over and he introduces himself. He says, "Hi guys, my name is Frank Thatcher, and I'm curious as to what you are doing here." And they say, "Hi Frank, you look like a military man." And he said, "Yeah, I'm lately from the Indian Army. I was a captain there." So they said, "Do you want to join us?" "Yeah, I think I would." He said, "I've come here to try my hand at gold mining," but he said, "There's nothing here. The water table is too high. You can't sink any shafts here. It just floods up immediately. I'm wasting my time here." "I'll ride along with you, gladly." So they said, "Well, we've got to give you a job. We'll make you aide-de-camp to Lieutenant Colonel John Willoughby. How about that?" I said, "I think that's very great. Thank you." So Frank joins them. And I'm very glad that he did, because he plays a very interesting part as we get to the end of this raid. And I'll tell you about it then. So now they got another recruit that they've picked up on this side of the border in the Transvaal. And they get ready to move off. So the rear guard, and one of the officers of the rear guard is a Lieutenant Hall. He's told he must stay behind and cut the telegraph lines and then join up with the men. So Jameson moves off, and Hall proceeds to cut the lines. Now Meyring sees this. He sees this going on, and he immediately sends a message to David Marais, the mining commissioner at Otto'shoop. And he says, "David, look what they're doing. They're cutting the lines." But Hall finishes his job, and they get on their horses and they go and rejoin the column. So Meyring says just at that point, as we are discussing this, lo and behold, what should appear but a rider from Zeerust. And here is this man, he suddenly appears on the scene. The dust is hardly settled behind the column, and he has a telegram in his pocket, and it's something urgent. Now, I'm very perplexed at this whole thing, and I'm trying to work out what could possibly have happened, because he's got a telegram in his pocket. Why wasn't it transmitted over the lines? He's been riding half the night, so it's something urgent. And at first I said to myself, well, obviously they couldn't get through because Albertus here is fast asleep. I mean, when you think of it, 511 men on horseback, 8 Maxims on galloping carriages, drawn by horses, plus a 12.5 Whitworth pounder cannon, drawn by 6 horses, plus 2 Whitworth cannons, 7.5 pounders, drawn by 6 horse teams, plus 640 spare horses, plus 158 spare mules, plus 150 African wranglers, plus various ammunition carts, at least 1 ambulance wagon. All of this canters by Albertus's bedroom window, and the man doesn't hear a thing. Well, maybe it's a blessing if you can sleep like that. I don't know. But that's what I first thought. This guy's been sleeping on the job. That's why they couldn't get the telegram through. But then I thought, no, man, the Boer Republic has got plenty of money. They would have had an excellent communication system. And I'm sure that it would have been automated. Telegram come through from Zeerust to Otto's Hoop. Printer would just have started up. And but Jameson's men found nothing in the Telegraph office. So if there was an automatic printer, there was no message there. So why didn't the message come through? And the only conclusion I can arrive at is that that line was cut. And I think that this long-range patrol that should have cut the line between Rustenburg and Zeerust cut the line instead between Zeerust and Otto's Hoop. Well, that's fine. Perhaps they just got their bearings a bit wrong. Somebody said at that time that in the Transvaal, it was the nature of the telegraph system to have lines running everywhere and in every direction. So perhaps they may have been confused there. So much so for this idea that a fence was cut instead of a telegraph line. I think that line was cut there. And they knew it in Zeerust that they couldn't get through. That's why they put a man on horseback, sent him with a telegram. But, here's the thing, and this is, of course, what's important. What was in that telegram? The telegram was from none other than the Commandant General himself, Piet Joubert. He was affectionately known as Slim Piet or Clever Piet. Well, it was not a derogatory term. It was a term of affection, and this man was very clever. Excellent guy. I mean, he taught himself the law, was a first-class lawyer. He was not a military man, and yet in the first Boer War, he took on the British. He defeated them at Majuba and at other famous battles. So he was a man who could, a man of many abilities, a very good man. He was the most powerful man next to Kruger in the Transvaal Republic. And he only lost an election very narrowly. And people say it's because of his sympathies with the Uitlanders. These were the citizens of Johannesburg that had been, agitating for more rights. He could understand their position. And he was sympathetic. And it cost him a little bit in his political career. Well, this telegram came from him. And the import of this telegram was in the form of a question, basically saying, Does anybody there know anything about armed troops massing on our frontier? Well, I'm so surprised that the top man, the Commandant General, had suspicions that something was going on across the frontier. How on earth could he have known that is the question that I asked myself. I think, security could not have been better at Pitsani. And Mafeking too. There was no leakages that took place from there. So my suspicions are that because of his sympathies, I think someone in Goldfields building in Johannesburg tipped him off. I don't think it was any of the committee members. It couldn't have been. Because he would have had more information had that been the case. But you can see he's groping. He doesn't know what's going on. Does anybody know anything about? So he's heard something. Somebody has heard something and relayed this to him. And it may just have been a servant there in that building, somebody that works there, that may have overheard just a couple of sentences or something and passed this on to him. I don't know. I have kind of studied and read up as much as I can, and I can't. Maybe somebody has a more definitive answer to that question. But the thing is this, the Boers were onto them. Now Meyering says, immediately I read the telegram, I, put together a reply to the effect that that this force has just moved through Otto's Whip, and I sent it on to Pretoria. Well, I don't know how he did that instantaneously, because he says himself, he watched Hall cutting the telegraph wires. So Albertus must have fixed them, and 10 points to him if he did. But that still doesn't account for the possible break further up the line. So maybe this rider from Zurist and Albertus, sort of backtracked along the line until they found that break, repaired that as well, and then he was able to send the message through. Certainly, Hubert got a reply to his telegram before lunchtime that day. So Albertus, I think he did a jolly good job in doing that. But I mean, it only answered one question. It just said that there was a force in the Transvaal that had moved through Otto's Whip. There were other questions, I'm sure, that they must have realized that the Boer General would want to know. Where did these people come from? Was this just the first wave? Were there others that were going to follow? And if so, were they also coming from the same place, or were they coming from somewhere else? These were all important questions that needed answers in order that, one could react to the situation. So David Marais jumps on a horse and he rides hell for leather for Mafeking to see if he can get more detail. And the line between Pretoria and Mafeking is repaired the next afternoon, and David is able to provide more detail. So the Boers now knew what was going on, that there was an armed incursion into their land, and a sizable force too that they needed to deal with. So their first reaction was to mobilize a commando, not at Zurist, but at Lichtenburg, and they set off to intercept Jameson. But unfortunately, they were 3 hours too late. I think we're going to stop there now. If you've been listening to me thus far, I take my hat off to you, really. I feel as though I've become very long-winded, but I knew from the start that this is a long ride and a lot of stuff is happening. So thank you if you've stayed with me thus far. Well, we'll continue the story as we meet again next time. Thank you. Sure, it really feels like a long evening, but I can't go yet, not until I say thank you to all of you for your support, particularly to those of you who have given material support to this channel. Believe me, it is never taken for granted, and it is very much appreciated, especially in these times. So thank you so much for that. A special word of thanks to those of you who have bought merchandise. There is a link. You can follow that if you're interested. I believe the company that does the distribution of these products is offering free shipping until the 19th of this month. So if you feel like taking advantage of that, well, the Lord bless you. And to our patrons and our members who have been so loyal and faithful and generous, I might add, over such a long period of time. I don't have the words to thank you. Really, I appreciate it very much. And, your support is something that I value greatly. So, the folk that I've been speaking about tonight, the officers of the men that led the Jameson raid, for the most part, came from the 6th Dragoons. So perhaps we can just play out tonight with their regimental march. And I trust that you'll enjoy this little snippet of music. It certainly was something that meant a lot to those men. They were very familiar with it, and they would have marched to this on the parade squares many times. So it's a little tune called Fare Thee Well, and it's for the 6th Inniskillen Dragoons. Folks, good night. Thank you all again. The Lord bless you. Take care. Keep well. And until we meet again, cheers for now.